Hello Sword fam, welcome back to my YouTube channel. I'm Brittany, and today I'm going to be talking about SIGI Forge longswords. SIGI Forge is a sword company based out of Slovakia, and I am so in love with their products. I've been a big fan of SIGI for a really long time. It was late 2019 when I got my very own SIGI sword. And I have had SIGIs in the school since 2019, so I can safely say that I have a lot of experience with SIGIs, and I am here to give you my review, not as an initial impression, but as a long-term product. I'm going to start by talking about my personal fetter, which is a SIGI Shorty. I love this sword to bits, and the way that I obtained it is actually kind of unique, so I did not reach out to SIGI and say, hey, sell me a sword. Instead, I went to Swordfish 2019, I competed, and they had provided all of the swords for the women's longsword tournament, and it happened to be one of these. And after the tournament, they had auctioned them off, and I could not leave Sweden without one of these. What impressed me most about the SIGI Shorty was that it was the first time that I had a sword that I felt I wasn't fighting against. It allowed me to actually fight my opponent my way, as opposed to having to fight the sword and fight the person. As you guys already know, I am not the biggest, strongest person in the fight usually, and upper body strength is not my strong point. There's some, kind of, but not a lot. So for me to find a sword that worked for me was extremely important, and it took many years. Some of the features about this sword that are really awesome is the first point, the flexibility. The flexibility that a SIGI provides is super safe, and I have definitely been thrust by swords that are way too stiff, and there's a whole story there. I won't get into it right now. I have noticed a trend amongst tournaments and competitors for a desire to have a more flexible blade, and it looks like SIGI really narrowed in on that and cornered the market, and so now you're starting to see a trend towards more flexible faders, but I think that SIGI Forge really cornered that initially and delivered really well on it, which is why I like this sword, and it is so reliable. We ended up choosing cord grips for all of the swords, and the one that I had was a full green cord wrap, and it has since seen better days, but I decided to rewrap it, and you can see that video on my YouTube channel as well. For the most part, you can see that the crossguard is still pretty straight. That's one of the things that I notice with a lot of fetters on the market is over time the crossguards will start to bend, and that's not a good thing at all. Or they will start to rattle, and this is really solid. There's no loose parts or anything like that. After a lot of use, swords will tend to come loose in certain parts. The crossguard will shake or rattle, and this has not been the case yet. Again, with a sword that I've had for well over 2 years and competed with and sparred with, trained with, teach with, it has held up incredibly well. Part of what really struck me as wonderful about SIGI is that I can take my bare hand, make a full fist on it, draw my hand across my blade, and there's no burrs. And I don't maintain this edge at all. I've never ever taken a file to this edge. There's not a single burr on this sword, and I love that. My very first Spez jacket ended up catching a burr on a sword, and it tore the fabric on my arm. So people that don't deburr their swords kind of annoy me, and I say that like nicely. I mean, please deburr your swords, not just because like it might tear somebody else's gear, but just from a safety standpoint, it's definitely better to deburr them. But of course, you don't need to worry about that with a SIGI. Again, more than 2 years, I don't have a single burr on here at all. One of the criticisms for this style of SIGI is the shape of the schilt. I've definitely heard people say that this is a very pointed, very angular shape that has created some hand injuries. I have never personally experienced that in my school. However, I'm not going to say that it didn't happen to other people, but I think one of the cool things that SIGI did to address that was creating different schilt shapes. And it has like little speed holes, little decorative speed holes. It makes the sword swing faster. Tip shape, awesome. It is flared and thickened at the end, so you get a little bit of increased surface area to make the thrust a little bit more safe. Again, the whole flexibility, everything about the design of this sword has been so thoroughly thought out. And when I was talking to Martin about his whole plan for SIGI and how they prototyped it and how they planned it out, you can tell the experience that they had from a competitive viewpoint really went into the whole design of this sword, and you can see it and you can feel it. After ordering over a dozen longswords in my HEMA school, I think we've only ever had one break and one take a bad enough set where we ended up having to replace it. That's a really, really good percentage of swords that still exist, haven't had any damage, haven't needed to be replaced. SIGI has proven time and time and time again that the swords will last. Swords are tools. Sometimes they break, but a really good sword should be able to last you for at minimum a year. And these ones have lasted so much longer than that. I actually expect them to last a few more years, hopefully. But the fact that they've made it, more than 2.5, almost 3 years without any significant damage, without needing any significant maintenance is incredibly impressive. So I can absolutely say that SIGI Forge is the quality that you would expect and at a price point that is reasonable. I also have a SIGI Standard, so you can see the difference between my shorty here and the Standard. So quite a bit longer in blade length, but also in the hilt length. So if I put these side by side, you can see that the hilt is a little bit shorter and the overall length is quite a bit less. But I don't know what else you would expect from a sword being called a shorty. Of course it's going to be shorter. I actually really liked the Standard when I first encountered it, and this was well before I'd even seen a SIGI shorty before, and I really liked it. It has all the same features. It's got that great flexibility, it's got a crossguard that isn't bending back the other way, it's got a good weight, a good balance, doesn't need a lot of maintenance. The only thing was that it was just a little bit big for me. And then of course, SIGI introduced the shorty and I was sold. We have several SIGI standards at Mordhau Historical Combat as loner swords, and so they take an insane amount of abuse. We train 5 times a week, and we have classes of 30 people. The amount of hours that just get put into our loner swords, which is this one, is a lot. So we really do stress test these swords, and it has held up incredibly. There's not even a set in this one yet, which is really impressive, and we've only had one take a set really, really badly that was just beyond fixing. For the most part, if you take a set in your SIGI, you're able to step on it and give it a hard bend and it'll go right back to shape, which is awesome. As a loner sword, it gets a huge amount of use, and of course that means there's more damage. The only significant damage that the loner swords took over the last 2.5-ish years was mostly to the hilt. Now, I think this is a mix of just perpetual wear from the gloves constantly rotating on the hilt, so a lot of times the cord wrap gets worn down, but also there are just strikes that happen in the hands. You get people who are just starting to learn how to sword fight, and hand hits happen, right? You learn from them, but of course every time a hit hits the hilt on the wood, it gets chipped, and so you can see a lot of that damage right there. It started to expose the tang a little bit here. So really the only maintenance that this sword needs at this point is to have maybe a new hilt put in, which is pretty easy. Then I'll just rewrap the hilt like I did with my other one, and it's good as new. As you can see, we have a lot of SIGIs here at the school. They've ended up being really great tools, awesome additions for my students to use as loners, great for my personal use as a competitor, as a teacher, as a fighter. And I can honestly say SIGI is one of the best manufacturers for swords, hands down. You will not compromise on any quality, and anybody who's new to HEMA that is looking to actually invest in a steel sword that will last, that won't break unexpectedly, this is it. As always, guys, thank you so much for watching. It is my pleasure to share my sword experiences with you.